That was quick. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being with us. I will take these glasses off because they've got a hokey little glare in them. But thanks, everybody, for being with us. This is our weekly show, the Shift series, here on the Ownstream platforms. I'm Stephen Shelley.
Teresa Scobin. I don't think we're going to do that
I don't
anymore.
think we need to do that, but we old habits die hard.
And we're on a number of platforms now
That's
this
right.
week.
Syndication. That's right. We're trying out a new software, which has us now on multiple places. So just so you know, we're with our friend, and I'll introduce him more officially in just a second, Nicolas Perrin. But if you have questions, if they come up for you during this conversation, you can share those on the thread underneath this live video in the Ownstream community. That's facebook.com/groups/Ownstream. And that's where we will be tracking the questions and kind of engaging with you and allowing for you to participate in this, because we welcome that. So if you're on YouTube or Twitter or God knows where, please join us in the Ownstream community if you want to ask us any questions and engage with Nicolas, especially on what we're about to discuss. So thanks for being with us. So Nicolas, welcome. Why don't you, we were just talking to you, and why don't you just tell people kind of where you are and what your current circumstances are?
Sure. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this co-create conversation today. I'm currently based in San Cristobal in Mexico. It's the third largest town in the Americas, after Antigua in Guatemala and Veracruz, which is also in Mexico. So it's an old town built in the 1800s. It's beautiful here. I'm here because of COVID-19. My plans rapidly shifted, which I'm sure everyone's plans across the planet rapidly shifted. And this was where I intuitively felt to set up camp while I allow the short term to unfold. And it's in the mountain ranges, about 2,000 meters above sea level. So it's actually quite cool here. You need a nice warm doona at night. But nice sunny days, about 25 degrees. So the weather is fabulous here. And I chose this place because there's lots of farmers around here. It's kind of a little bit off grid. So if, let's say, the shit really hit the fan, I knew I could get food. I could get all my basic needs kind of met. And we're going to be talking about some of these things today. That's why I came here, because there's a large Indigenous community that has been living in Indigenous ways for thousands of years. And whether there's COVID or not, they're still here and they're still doing their thing. So that's why I chose to be here.
Beautiful.
Yeah, nice. Well, so let's back up. Let's kind of get people kind of some context before we dive in, because we met you physically in Costa Rica a couple of years ago at the Envision Festival. I can still remember kind of sitting under a tree. There are thousands of people around us trying to eat some lunch or dinner or something. But having this remarkable conversation with you about kind of your travels and what you were studying and looking at and experiencing. And as best as you can, just kind of summarize kind of your early life and maybe from the perspective of your interest in spirituality and the sacred, and especially kind of this whole notion of community, how that kind of grew into a trip that you took that, I mean, I don't know if it's ended. It feels to me like you're still kind of traveling, which is so exciting. So maybe kind of give us that timeline in a snapshot, and then we can kind of dive into some of the things you've found and discovered on the way.
All right. So just to give some context, I left the corporate world in 2010. I was working for JP Morgan, which is a big American bank. And my intuition was saying to me that I needed to get out of the corporate world, and I had 1 year to do it. Otherwise, something bad was going to happen. And it was a very strong feeling. Wow. I knew I had a year. I had absolutely no idea what I was meant to be doing in life. But my spiritual thing happened in 2006. And for 4 years, I was just going through transformational work and learning as much as I could. Basically, every night after my work, I would go to some kind of course or trade, do Reiki practice, all sorts of things. And eventually, the next step was I started to work for an inspirational speaker, which was all about follow your intuition, follow the wisdom of the heart. And it was a perfect bridge for me, having been in corporate, which is so mind-orientated, very control. You follow the system, you follow the rule. I got catapulted into a reality which was do whatever you need to fulfill the requirements of this role, and it's your responsibility. Basically, that was what the inspirational speaker sort of told me. So I worked for a year and a half, and then I got catalyzed again out of that very, very quickly into, you're not working for anyone anymore. It's time to actually bring your own work into the world. So in June 2012, I started my own healing practice. I went through a whole series of initiations. I'd never run it before. Never really been healing myself. And suddenly I was thrown in there. It definitely was not, let's say, the personality part of me, my ego part of me's desire to do that. It happened out of nowhere. But I just like, okay, this is what I've got to do. 6 months later, I then created a company with 3 other coaches to bring heart-based values leadership back into the corporate world, which was quite a challenge at that time. It was well out there. You know, even the word, like the name company was called Love Intelligence, into the corporate world. So, you know, we were really, you know, it was well outside of the scope of corporate. Unfortunately, it only lasted about a year because there were some misalignments. And then out of that, again, at Vipassana, wondering what am I meant to be doing with my life? Lionheart Coaching, which is, let's say, one of my projects that I'm still working, that's still unfolding, got born out of the ashes of nothingness again. And basically that is all about putting people to catalyze their soul blueprint, which is, what am I here to actually bring to the earth? What are my gifts, talents, and abilities? And how can I create a project, movement, or business that reflects that soul truth? And that's been actually solid since the end of 2013. It's been my truth. So those earlier kind of creations and disruptions were obviously just part of my learning and what I needed to go through. So the next catalyst point was in April 2010. Out of nowhere, and my life just kind of didn't stop working. And I asked this question. I was realizing that my work with Lionheart Coaching was not proceeding, and there was a reason why that was not happening. When I was waiting for my yoga class, I asked the universe, I said, what is it that I need to see? Because I know that proceeding with Lionheart at this point in time is not the way, but I don't know what I'm meant to be doing. This download came in, and it was, you need everything. You need to pack your life up. You need to leave Sydney, Australia, and you need to go on an indefinite awakened pilgrimage, and further instructions will be given. So I had 2 weeks to pack my life up, because I already had a ticket to leave. I had a ticket to leave for Europe on the 17th of May, 2017. That transmission came in on the 29th of April, 2017. I had 2 weeks to pack everything up, tell my flatmate I'm moving out, to sort all my stuff out. So it was intense. Like, the universe gave me, it got done the night of my flight. It was really just enough to sort myself out. And I was on that plane, and basically the narrative or the download that happened over the next month was to visit sacred sites, and to explore these sacred sites for soul akashic healing, to connect to the ancient wisdoms or the ancient paths of the world, with whether they're pyramids or natural vortice points around the planet, not human created, but to really connect to this ancient wisdom that has been there for a very long time. And then on the other side, the flip side was to go to intentional communities, which is all about moving forward, which is all about the future, which is how can we as a society live and thrive and live together. And there was a whole series of other bits and pieces as well. So that's been the focus for the last 3 years, because it's now May 2020. So I've been moving around the planet from everywhere, from Japan to Africa to North America, Central America, South America. So it's pretty much been everywhere. And that's the quick snapshot, as quickly as I could, to give you some kind of context of what's been going on.
That's beautiful, Nicolas. I have goosebumps just
at
the downloads, at your clarity, at that responsiveness, like maybe before we move now into kind of like the content of your travels, and there's so much that we want to get into with you. Maybe you could, for people who haven't had that experience or don't know what it feels like to get such a clear shot of, like a download. You had a couple there that you mentioned, one was you need to get out of the corporate world within a year. very clear, and then like you need to go on this pilgrimage, and you just did it too. Maybe you could talk a little more about that experience, how you know it, if you can.
Yeah.
And then like
Sure.
what made you so clearly respond? Like you very clearly responded to those. Like, can you explain that part a little bit more for people?
Yeah, that's a good one. So for me, how it happens is I notice that my external world starts to kind of not flow as much. It kind of, things become a little bit difficult. There's a little bit more effort involved, and I can feel that it's like there's a bit of grinding and crunching going on, a bit of resistance, and that's always a sign for me that, okay, I'm moving in a direction that's not the path of resistance, and so perhaps there's something that I'm not seeing. So in order to get the information, what's crucial is to first of all stop everything and to create a space where I can empty my mind and to connect to a high level of frequency or energy or consciousness, so that I can ask questions and gently put them into the space and then allow the answer to come to me. Now, sometimes the answer will come as like a symbol, or it may come like as like an image. I might get a very specific scene that comes. It has like an actual voice coming, or it could come like as just a knowing, like just this deep knowing. I'm like, okay, that's what it is. So it can come in different ways, and it's come to me in different ways over the years as well. It's not just been one way. Usually though, there are kind of little signs that happen. There are little clues that happen beforehand. And so if we're paying attention to our life, there's usually a sign before. So for example, when I left working my last paid job in June 2012, 3 months before, when I was running this inspirational speakers for him, I was running all his events and putting everything together. In the middle of nowhere, a woman ran out of one of the events that I was running, and she just came up to me and she said out of the blue, "You should be on that stage speaking," like just out of nowhere. And I was a bit like, I'm quite happy what I'm doing. I'm quite happy supporting, this guy is doing great work. I don't have any intention of doing that. So there was, the universe had just kind of given me a little bit of a prompt that something is going to be happening, pay attention. And for example, when I left for Europe, there was a couple of things that had happened. Like on Boxing Day 2016, a dear soul sister of mine had said to me, "I feel we need to go on a sacred site tour, and I want to go to Glastonbury with you, and I want to go and visit the ancient Cathar sites in southern France." And so that was actually that was the initial reason why I booked my flight in mid-May. I was going to just do a 2-month with her and a partner on a sacred site tour. So again, the universe was already starting to put seeds in. I had initially just thought it's only going to be a 2-month gig and then I'm back in Australia. But that wasn't actually the situation at all. So.
Beautiful. Well, maybe we can talk a little bit about where did you go? Like, where did you go first? And, what, tell us a little bit about how it unfolded from there in terms of the sacred sites. Like, where did you go?
So my first stop when I left in May 2017, I went to a Lemurian pineal toning choir, which is pretty out there for some people. But basically what that means is, Lemurian pineal toning choir. And I have never sung in a choir and had no interest in singing in a choir. And if it wasn't for a friend of mine that said to me, "No, but seriously, like, just come, like, doesn't matter if you can't sing, like, just come and trust me," I probably wouldn't. But basically, we were singing these ancient tones, and it was phenomenal because it's like you're in this field, in this collective consciousness field of about 500 people. There's a lot of people went. In fact, the first one that they had in Hawaii was 1,000 people from around the world turned up to participate in this choir event. That was 2012. The first one that I went to was in 2015, but this one was my third one. So I'd kind of already participated. I thought, what a great way to start this world tour off with people from all around the world singing ancient Lemurian tones that really elicit and bring forth a higher level of consciousness. So not only is there a transformation that happens for me personally, but there was this incredible group energy that was created with 500 people. It was a great start just to start at the sacred site in Mount Blanc in France, which is near Chamonix, beautiful part of the world. Despite it being kind of the early part of summer, the mountain was beautiful white snow, crystal clear sky, nice,
Wow.
beautiful air. It was stunning. So that was the starting point. And basically from there, I visited all the different Cathar, the ancient Cathar, which is kind of like an ancient Christian Gnosis sect that really kind of their own way forward, really way of kind of living and embodying love, and I suppose trying to take this of Yeshua in a metaphysical and practical way. But they got exterminated by the Roman Catholic Church in the 12th century. Everything got just exterminated. So there was healing work that we did by going to these different sacred sites along the way. I also visited Damanhur, which was the first intentional community that I visited. I'd been in their school of medicine for about a year as preparation. I was learning about their philosophies and learning how this community operates, which was quite radically different to anything actually that I've seen out there. So a very kind of metaphysical, spiritual, alchemical, a strong connection to ancient Egypt, strong connection to Atlantis. That was the lineage. And most people that were connected, they knew each other from past lives. There was already a strong soul connection that these people had. Now, my with that community was particularly around alchemy and the art of transformation. So there were people there that were experts and specialized in that. So something in my being was, I need to connect with these people. So they had all sorts of technologies and things that most people, think are impossible, connecting with entities from parallel multiverses. They're these very complex alchemical instruments that you can put on your body that have different purposes with different entities in them that work with you, create a relationship with them. So kind of out there sort of things. And these incredible technologies of healing different body parts, using energies, everything from mental illness to, liver illness or organ failure. So amazing things that this community was creating. They had artwork where they found a way to be able to imprint entities. So when you're connecting to the artwork, you're actually having a communication with an entity, and energetic, it starts to work on your energy field. And of course, every art had a different purpose. So really incredible things that I immersed myself in, and I learned a lot. It really expanded my mind of what was possible. Of course, what Damanhur is most famous about are the famous temples that they literally carved out of the mountain. And where these temples are located are where 4 synchronic lines cross. So synchronic lines is what the nervous system of the planification hub, or let's say we could call it the grids, the community grids of how we as a collective know what's going on. And in a sense, what they were saying is that the communication grids had been hijacked, I suppose, by malevolent forces that were kind of wanting to keep humanity in a lower consciousness. And part of their higher mission is to actually take back those grids, for the light and love of the planet. So they have a very specific kind of mission. And these temples, I suppose, are sacred sites. Literally, they have very powerful energy. There's a natural energy vortex in there, but then, of course, there's the human element where they've actually built and created frequency there as well. So I did the southern part of France. I did the northern part of Italy, and then I went to Glastonbury. The first time that I went to Glastonbury, of course, very sacred. It's very sacred on the planet and is a major vortice point in Europe. Powerful to the point where every time I've gone to Glastonbury, it's like everything that I wanted to do or everything that I intent just crumbled away. There's something quite mysterious and almost a mischievous energy there. Of course, there's the lineage of the Druids and the magicians and the Magi. Very strong resonance in that part of the world, ancient, that I believe came from Atlantis. I think Merlin was actually a teacher that moved England to that part of the world to share the ancient wisdoms of Atlantis and to continue that legacy. And there's all sorts of sites in Glastonbury, hundreds of sacred sites, the red well, the white well, which representing the divine feminine, divine masculine. There was the original, meant to be the original first church of Yeshua, which was called the Way. So the very first beginnings of the Christianity began in Glastonbury. And it's just a sacred piece of land with a lot of crazy people there as well. There's some really wacky people in Glastonbury, you know, and you think from people that are like Satanists, you know, try to invoke the devil and, you know, black magic to white magic. You've got everything there. It's a bit hectic, but it's interesting, you know. If you want to go on a bit of a wild ride, then that's pretty amazing place to go. So I just want to check me to go anywhere specific.
Yeah.
What would you like me to focus on?
Let's go back to Damanhur. That's in France, you said?
Italy, I think.
Is it?
It's in Italy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the big one.
That's the one.
Yeah.
So what would you say is the intention or the reason that they've come together? Why is it that they're there together, living the way that they are?
Yeah, so the founder, his name was Falco. He died unfortunately in 2012. Was definitely a man of incredible abilities and had a lot of remembrances, even as a kid, of the magical, mystical world, able to do all sorts of crazy things, inverted commas. So he had a vision of bringing people together, bringing people that had a resonance to the ancient Egyptian alchemical ways, which was connected to Atlantis, to again act as a beacon of what is possible for humanity to live forward, but within a very specific spiritual kind of framework, in the sense that they have lots of pathways that you as a person that can participate in that community can follow. But ultimately, it's to really bring light and love onto the planet, but through the alchemical, magical way. So that's the path that they follow. And of course, alchemy is about energy, rituals, ceremonies. They have so many different ceremonies and rituals that when I went there, you can participate in and witness. There's a lot of things that if you're not part of the community, you're not allowed to know. So obviously, I was limited in that way, but I did do quite a few training courses with them. Their alchemy training, I did a past life training with them. I did a communication with plant kingdom with them. There's a lot of things that they've got that isn't easily or it isn't accessible, so accessible in the mainstream world. So it's a great place to go if people want to learn and just kind of put their mind outside of the current box. Strongly recommend it, because got an incredible amount of knowledge and wisdom that they're willing to share with people, even if you are a visitor. But ultimately, they recognize as well that it's through community that we as an individual, you grow and you evolve. And also the emphasis is about being of service. But you'll notice that, like particularly the people that I connected with, they were very generous with what they knew. They're very kind, and they were willing to support me in whatever questions I had. I wanted to know and learn, and that was incredibly generous of them and kind of them to spend the time and to share their knowledge and wisdom and insights with me.
Yeah, I remember when I met you in Costa Rica, you introduced me, you talked to me then about Damanhur, because I had not heard of it. Stephen and I were right at the beginning of kind of our exploration, and we knew of a few communities in Costa Rica, which I think you probably had been to, or I know you went, but I think you'd been to maybe Pachamama. I can't remember when we talked. So to give a little context, like Damanhur is it kind of one of the oldest and largest of the communities? It's kind of one, it is, right? And maybe for people who are interested in visiting communities like this, like, can you just go to communities like this? And do you need to, how long did you stay? And what's that experience like?
Sure. So with Damanhur, my suggestion would be if you wanted to go and visit, they've got like a 3-day tour that you can do. They basically will take you to some of the key parts of the community. You get some information and knowledge. I would also suggest people to do some of their trainings to get a bit of a flavor of their philosophy, to get a bit of a feeling of what that community is about, because it's not going to resonate for everyone, which is the key. Like with community, really the idea is to find a place that you resonate with, somebody who feels called to be there. Otherwise, you're kind of wasting your time. So I would start with that. The next step is if someone wanted to actually join, you've got to join the School of Meditation, and you do at least a year of training before you even decide to consider going or being an initiative or to take that next step and commit. And then there's just different levels of commitment in that community. And it's up to, if you wanted to live and participate in that community, obviously that's a much higher level of commitment. But there are people who don't live in the community, they live outside, but they are intimately connected with the community, and they've got projects that they're working on, all sorts of different things. So it's probably, I would suggest to do the 3-day introduction and then take it from there.
I know we want to dive into a lot of specific questions about the communities you saw, and specifically around kind of the context we're in the world now and what people, where we're headed. Can you tell us a little first, Nicholas, like when you had this vision that you were going on this trip, like, did you know what you were looking for when you were going to the communities? Like, was there a quest you were on? Was there something you were looking for specifically? What were you looking for? Did it kind of evolve as you made your way through your travels?
It definitely evolved. And to be honest, when I first started, I didn't know what I was doing, which I think is normal for any of us. When we start into we've never done before, it's a bit like I've got the inspiration, but there isn't a lot of context for me. Yes, it definitely has evolved. And I guess the connection for me was I started to realize when I was asking what is my higher purpose or my being here on the planet, I realized that a part of it is to ground in New Earth paradigm templates. And for me, the piece for me that was really important was it's the bridge between accessing the higher level of consciousness or our divine blueprints in communion with the matrix or the oneness of all that is. But then how can that practically be implemented and expressed and experienced in this 3D material world in a very tangible way? Like how do I and how do I share my gifts and talents? And is there money? Is there no money? How many people do I live with? Like all of these kind of very practical kind of questions. And for me, the practical aspect is important because ultimately we're here in this human reality, a human being, and to experience the material realm. And I guess it's just about finding that balance point of not getting lost in it, but at the same time, not getting lost in the spiritual frequency, energetic, and then kind of almost escaping the human experience to feel good the whole time and be in the kumbaya state of love, bliss, and chocolate bliss balls all the time, and not engage with life, where there is going to be challenge and there are obstacles for the purpose of our soul growth and evolution. So for me, it's finding a balance point, and I guess going to these communities was also a practical way for me at a personal level to go, I don't really resonate living in environments because it became so obvious to me that they're not healthy, they're not pro-human, nourishing, supportive environments. I realized that I was having to spend 2 to 3 hours a day on doing energy work to purify my energy field, to create a balanced mind, to be able to function. I was like, this is not an optimal way for me to live. This is actually not supporting. And most of the people, like, as I created a life in Sydney where I increased the amount of freedom and time and the life that I wanted, it actually became boring because everyone else was running to work. Everyone else was stressed. Everyone else was, you know, chasing money and chasing success and chasing all of these things that no one really actually kind of really thought about and gone, is this really what I want to be doing with my life? And so it became boring for me. I was like, how many times do you want to just go to the beach or go to the national park and enjoy yourself? But I realized it's like my life is not just about me, it's about people, it's about community. And so this next piece for me was also, what is it that I want to participate in, and what is it that I want to learn, and what is it that I want to bring into the world, not only for myself but for others. So I think that, you know, that was definitely a driver, and it is true that I don't want to live in a city environment. And so that creative tension is forcing for alternatives.
Yeah, nice. Nicolas, tell us about some more examples, some more places you visited, some more communities that really stood out to you as being really vibrant and potent. You know, I know that when I walk into say a temple or a church that really has some sense of the sacred, you can really feel that. Maybe talk about some examples of that within communities that you visited on your travels.
And maybe like, what about those places was such a contrast from the way of living you were just talking about? Like, what makes those communities feel have something else?
Something else, yeah. So every single community I've been to is radically different to every other community. So that's also important to recognize, right? So they all have their unique flavor. So again, that's why I said, you know, if people wanted to go to Damanhur, is that your flavor? Is that your calling? Because there's so many out there. So, for example, Findhorn, also one of the oldest ones in Europe for sure. I loved the energy that was present there. Was this idea that anything is possible, because this community was founded in a part of Scotland where there's sandy, it's right near the ocean, it's sandy, it's cold, it's miserable, and they were able to create these incredible gardens of enormous cabbages, and they created a relationship with the diva, the nature spirits, and them in harmony to be able to create a win-win for humans and for kingdom. And so as a result, they created these incredible vegetable gardens that were, you know, from a scientific or logical point of view, should never have happened. The environment was bad, the soil was bad, the weather was bad, everything was bad. But yet they challenged the status quo and they created these incredible gardens. So that kind of energy was amazing, and kind of in a different way. But Tamira also started a desert. Portugal, unfortunately, is turning into it, and this piece of land, they've transformed this piece of land. Amazing. They've done an incredible job of using water retention strategy from an Austrian professional. I can't quite remember his name, but he came and he helped them basically capture all the water on the land, and they've transformed this desert into an oasis. These trees, these fruit trees had so much fruit on them that were bending over. Like it was abundant, and it was really it was amazing. I was like, transformation. Like they've completely supported Mother Earth. They've helped bring her back, and as a result, all the natural springs in the area, not just on that property, but on all the neighboring properties, the springs were not starting to come back, and the farmers in the areas around were starting to now also receive benefit, and that was extraordinary. I absolutely loved that. That community also has an activist kind of angle. Was like they're really like a supporter of Mother Earth, and very vocal. They have a very vocal part of their community around that. So they've got a lot of science and technology, and they had different experiments and different ways of harnessing natural energy. And I liked, what I liked about that community was they had all these very different kind of groups that were doing very different things. So you could join the permaculture people if you wanted to master about growing food, or you could join this technology. They had a whole people that specialized around human relating and master if there's a conflict in the group, how do you dissolve it? And they've got some facilitators whose job was just keep their finger on the pulse to make sure the community is healthy, and if there are problems, that the problem is nipped in the bud as quickly as possible. They had a whole love temple and sacred sexuality body of work as well. That was really, really big. And the whole kind of guidance was connect to the matrix and allow the divine matrix to speak to you. So that was, that was beautiful. And other kind of interesting things, they had special projects like communicating with the horses or finding the relationship between humans and rats, kind of like out there kind of things. Like, they were really working on very specific relationships between animals and humans. And of course, they had all sorts of different training programs and offerings, and people could come and volunteer there as well. That was great. I met some people there. I really enjoyed that particular community. That kind of really stood out in that way. Then in Pachamama in Costa Rica, which I think both of you guys have been to as well. Again,
we're aware of it.
Oh, you haven't been?
No, yeah.
Okay. So that community, a little bit different. I loved like the buildings that they created. Amazing buildings, beautiful buildings, really kind of working with the natural habitat, open space, of course, Costa Rica environment. So you don't really need so much just a roof to make sure that the rain doesn't get you. But you really felt like nature and humans were really kind of working together and flowing there, and you could hear the monkeys in the forest, and they kind of created this community in as much harmony as they could without kind of destroying their environment, so that humanity and the animals and the plants kind of come together. They had all sorts of interesting kind of events. I remember they had like this, I think, the white rock concert, and it was like this really interesting experience. You would go into an altered state of consciousness, and then they were playing all these really old kind of rock music from the 50s and 60s. It was a very specific kind of experience, and it was in the jungle, and it was a 17-hour event. And one of the rules was that if you came, you had to go the whole way. You couldn't leave. Like, so the container was sad, and that was something I've never experienced anything quite like that. It was kind of out, in the jungle, the monkeys, the howler monkeys, you could go and swim in the river. They had quite a strong kind of. They had a very clear business. That was founded by Israelis, actually, Pachamama, and they had a very strong business mindset as well. Like, how do we thrive here? How do we make money? And so that was quite clear. Like those guys had really kind of made sure that the long-term sustainability of that project was supported by business ventures as well, and how that would work, through having visitors and obviously kind of having a holiday there to volunteers, supporting the running of that community as well. So that kind of had a different kind of energy there. Let me just get the spelling correct, because Konohana community in Japan at Mount Fuji. So they were 100% sustainable with all food, all organic food, and as the Japanese are, incredibly efficient, incredibly meticulous. That's done like with precision and love and care, and that every person just took such care in everything. What really stood out in that community was when I came that first night, 8 people in that community. That was when I went, and about 22, I think it was 22 out of the 88 people in that community were children, and the 4-year-olds were actually facilitating the meeting. When I got there. So the kids are really involved. They were the ones front. They were the ones organizing and facilitating. So the adults really wanted the children to be empowered. Also, the children got to choose which adults they wanted to stay with. So even if, let's say, you had a child in that community, it didn't necessarily mean that you would be the one that would bring the child up. So adults and children would get to match each other up. And obviously both had to agree. Both the adult and the child had to agree, yeah, this is the household that I want to participate in, and this is why. So I thought that was kind of that cool. That was really revolutionary, different way of really engaging with children education. They also had, for example, which I think is traditional in Japanese culture, the bathing everyone bathed. So men and women, they would be separated, but you would bathe together. There was a very specific ritual of how you would do that. So whether you're a visitor or you're a, so you got to obviously meet people. It's a very intimate part of human living, right? Bathing, which in the Western world, generally you tend to bathe by yourself. So that's something quite beautiful. And I really liked that they were abundant in everything that they needed and wanted, but they lived a very simple life. Everything was very simple, but abundant. And I really appreciate that's kind of also a flow through from Japanese culture and how the Japanese people have lived from historical times, but that really kind of came through. And just to give you a really cool way of how an ingenious way of how these people were able to grow food. So land is incredibly expensive. However, they have a system there where it's more important to honor your ancestors, to make sure that the land is in impeccable state, right? And so what they were able to do is that because most of the people were to go to cities and live in cities, and for a lot of the younger generations were not interested in farming and the upkeep of the land, this community was able to grow the vegetables rent-free and get all of the food that they in exchange for making sure that the land was impeccably looked after in honor of the ancestors. So I thought that was quite magical, and a smart way of working with what exists in that paradigm, but not being limited by it. And amazing backdrop, like right at the foothills of Mount Fuji, which was just stunning. Yeah. So those are just a few examples that really touched me and appreciated those communities.
I'd love to kind of get into some specific themes that might tie these communities together, things that they probably all are questioning and dealing with and being challenged by, or maybe have had solutions to. One you've talked about a little bit, and I'd love to hear you talk more about, is the relationship to food. Are most of these communities, I imagine, are they all growing their own food and more or less sustainable as a whole, or do some of them kind of interface with the outside world in terms of bringing things in? How does that usually work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So most of the communities are actually not 100% sustainable at the moment. So that was interesting to me. I actually thought that would be, and I was kind of surprised. Some communities would be, say, 80 to 90% sustainable. Now, some communities like Tamira, for example, had very clear, because they're one of their key points is to move into a decentralized, localized economy. They'll not be buying any foods that are created from that region. So from Spain, basically Spain, Portugal, in that southern Europe region. So, for example, you wouldn't find soy sauce at the sanctuary because that comes from Asia, and that's not. So they wanted to kind of reduce any kind of impacts, shipping impacts, and all of those kind of things. So if foods were not available in that region, they couldn't be grown on the land, that they weren't able to be bought from the local farmers in that kind of area of the world, then you go out, then you wouldn't have it, basically. Some communities had quite kind of rules around that. For example, Tamama, they would support a lot of the organic farmers in the region. So I know that they were not sustainable, but they had farmers they would buy their food off. So there were agreements in place, and I guess there probably wasn't enough land, and probably B, enough people that were passionate about that area of food evolution, and it's a massive job. So they outsourced it to local farmers. And then again, like the Kono Hona family actually had an abundance of food, and they even had a restaurant that people from the outside world could come and they would serve you food and cook food. So they kind of around and created a business out of it, another way to generate income, to support the community. So that's and then like, for example, a community like Damanhur, there is some farmers that bought the community, but that has a different model because it's not actually one block of land. So you've got like what they call the federal piece, which is basically where all the spiritual buildings are, some of the main buildings, but most of the people are in the surrounding towns. So Damanhur would own what they call the nuclei, which are these large houses, say could house anywhere between 15 to 25 people. And Damanhur was also intimately connected into a lot of these villages, like the lawyers were actually Damanhurians. So they had a different philosophy of we're going to integrate ourselves into the dream world. We're going to influence it. We're not going to be closed to it. So there is like an open loop that Damanhur kind of had with their local villages and surrounding community, but they were not sustainable, and people in the community could definitely still go to supermarkets and buy food if they wanted to do that.
What about you suggested this a couple of times, but let's discuss it too. The way that they interact with the community around their community. Are there usually kind of businesses or ways that they interface with the community at large? Maybe, you talked about the community in Japan having a little restaurant. Are there other examples of ways in which these communities kind of create income, form little businesses so that they can kind of, I guess, sustain themselves?
Yeah, there definitely is different ways that they do that. So yeah, like cafes, restaurants with some of them. A lot of their money can also be generated through welcoming visitors. That may be overseas people, but it could also be local people as well. For people to come and stay on their land, to have an experience. It's almost like not quite a holiday. It's kind of like an educational, informal, holiday, vacational kind of thing. Like there is kind of segment, I guess, where people are not wanting a mainstream holiday. They're wanting to learn something. They're wanting to engage in a different reality, but they don't really want to be a volunteer. They don't want to be working 4 to 5 hours a day on the land or working on projects. They still want to have their freedom. They still want to do whatever they want to do. So there is that most of them basically had some kind of program be generating income through that. Others would have training courses, so people would come and learn from them, all sorts of different trainings depending on what their specialty was, retreats, gatherings. Like for example, at Tamira, I went to their summer conference where they had I think it was about 400 people came. So, they would have generated some income from that. And most of these communities make it accessible. So, you can choose, you can camp, if you're on a budget, you can camp. You can trade your time for food and money if you're, really on a basic budget. But if you have money and you just want to kind of have a more luxurious experience, they usually have houses and different kind of accommodations. So this kind of range of possibilities that is available for people depending on what their needs are and what they want.
And what about like governance? I mean, that's something I'm always interested in and thinking about these communities have so much to teach us, but what about how they're governed? Like what kind of examples, different kinds of examples did you see and what was kind of working well?
Yeah, the one that resonates the most is that there would be let's say a core governance team that would be voted in by the community. And usually they're the people that have the most experience, the most wisdom, aligned to values. They've got a track record of caring about people. They've got a good sense of wisdom and know how to make powerful decisions and choices that's for the best for the community. But it was basically to make sure that the community has agreed on is that the choices that are being made are in alignment with that. And of course, if there are any problems, then they need to make choices. And then underneath that, there would be like smaller little committee groups that would focus on very specific pieces of the community, which would be more connected to the day-to-day running of, let's say, food production or managing the volunteers or the science and technology hub or using training and development. So, and again, you would begin to participate in that. And that would be much more micro. There'd be much more, that small group would just be focusing on that particular particular piece of the community. But of course, they would be reporting back up on the general development to the steering committee or to the vision holders at the top, just to make sure that everyone's fingers are on the same pulse and the same direction. That to me seemed to work the best. I mean, there are other systems. It depends on how big the community is. If you've got hundreds of people, or if you've got 20 people, then the governance system is going to be definitely going to be.
I know you mentioned too that there's so many different, and you can tell I love your illustrations because you can feel the differences. But is it your experience that communities are united around a common intention? Like each of them has their own common purpose. It sounds like they have a lot of different ones. What we kind of anecdotally heard in Costa Rica, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is that communities, you get to Costa Rica, people are like, oh yeah, everybody wants to create a community. Like that's what we heard. And oh sure, you want to create a community. So curious about what we heard was one of the reasons that communities fail is that they're not united around a common purpose, or they don't have like a strong unity aspect around that. So I'm curious just if you've heard that, and also if you saw in communities that were thriving that was an element that they did have that.
Yeah, so like with community, if there isn't a clear vision, a very clear reason of what this community is about, then absolutely it's not going to last. Definitely not. So that's true. And at best, like you might get one generation, but then the next generation of children or people coming in could just lose interest. So there's got to be a very clear inspirational reason for existing, because otherwise, well, when there are challenge obstacles, that inspiration has to be stronger and the challenges that are being presented. And those challenges have to be seen as this is part of my development, this is part of my evolution, this is not a bad thing, this is a good thing. But if there isn't that clear vision, then the human tendency is to go for pleasure, comfort, belonging. What's the easy option? Do I really want to deal with this shit? And if there isn't that calling there, so absolutely essential. And I would also say that every person in the community has to know what is my role in relationship to this vision, and how does this greater vision actually support my being and my soul? Like, why not be somewhere else, or why not be involved in some other project? Why this project? And also everyone else in the community has to also know why you're there as well. So everyone knows why everyone else is there. What's your role? What's your contribution? What unique gifts and talents and responsibilities? And at a very personal level, like how is the community help you as a person to evolve and grow? That's also really important, because it needs to be a cycle of, I'm giving to the community, but there's also a receiving as well that's happening. So that's essential. But then also, there are also communities that have alliances. There's different intentional community alliances that happen where, they help each other. They might have different angles. Like I know, for example, Tamira, Vindhod, and Aura, the one in India. Aura.
Is this in Pondicherry, Oroville?
It's the one in, Oroville. That's the one. Oroville. Yeah. They're connected. I haven't been to Oroville, but it's connected with Damanhur and Vindhod and Timir as well. So there are kind of like, particularly the ones that have been around for a while. Like there's lots of support and people that kind of learn from each other and communicate, and they call themselves like brothers and sister communities, and wanting to promote, let's say, an alternative way for the collective. So they do support each other with training programs, and there's all sorts of different conferences that you can, that they all kind of support each other in.
Are there any kind of unique examples of kind of within the community itself, value exchange mechanisms being created that are divorced from the traditional kind of money, fiat currency kind of thing? Are there some interesting ways that communities have solved that so as to kind of disconnect from that system?
Yeah, so there are a few communities that did their own currency. So basically, if let's say you were a visitor and you would come in, there would be like a at the welcome office, you would have to buy their currency, and everything in the community you would use that currency to exchange. And partly I think that was also to solve the problem of, let's say, corruption or stealing and stuff, because there's just one central point in the system of where actual money would come in. But they were still interfacing with the fiat system, because again, a lot of them were not completely sustainable. So they still need to interface with the outside world to buy food and all sorts of stuff. They're not completely disconnected from the outside world. But for example, like with the Konohana family community, they so all the money is in the community, and no one actually had their personal income. So let's say you had something that you personally needed, you would just put a request in, and as long as if the community felt that was in resonance and in alignment and something that you actually needed, then of course the community would buy it for you. So in a sense, no one really owned the money. The money was held by the community, and so it was everyone's responsibility to kind of make sure that there is enough money there. In the case of people still often have to have a job or some way of generating, whether they're a healer or a coach, or whether they've got some kind of outside job. So they had responsibilities within Damanhe that they would fill on different levels of that community, but they also had to be financially sustainable as well. So that create a bit of stress and tension, because there's a lot of different inputs there of having to manage my own well-being, contribute to the community, obviously the spiritual side. There's also the practical side. But from what I can see, or what I come across so far, there wasn't a community that was just completely devoid of any kind of exchange. And my interpretation of that is we haven't reached a consciousness level where every person has fully connected into the value that they can 100% offer that group of people, which would basically mean if every person is giving 100% of themselves, then there wouldn't be a need for money exchange, because 100% of the value is in the collective pot. So then anything that I actually needed would be available. There also wouldn't be any need for hoarding or saving or control, because the lack mentality wouldn't be there anymore, because I would know that if I needed anything, it would be available. So I wouldn't actually own anything anymore, because there wouldn't be any need for that. But we as a collective, we're not ready for that yet. And there hasn't been a community that I've seen that is operating in that way. And that's a consciousness problem. It's not a systems problem. That's a consciousness. And that just means we've all got to just continue doing the inner work and our frequency and be patient. But at some point in the future, I don't believe that we will need money as a way to transact value in the world.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there are any unique examples of people, like you were talking about how everyone's unique contribution is important, that's defined. If there were examples of people contributing in a way that wasn't financial in a community, and I'm sure there are various service roles, but if you saw anything like that. No. Interesting.
No, not yet. I mean, I'm sure there are smaller communities like 20, 30 people where they probably are doing something like that. And my sense is if a group of people have got together and there's a very strong soul resonance and there's a deep level of trust, and there's, they've gone through a whole journey to develop and evolve, that kind of group of people probably would be ready for something like that. But when you've got people and you've got people coming and leaving, I don't feel we're quite ready for that right at this point. Because at the moment, the reality, people are putting more in and others are not, or for different reasons. It's not completely fair and equal at this point. And we haven't, as a collective, kind of worked out, well, how do we want to play in that way? Yeah. Are we okay if some people put in more and some people don't? Okay with that. If someone just wants to sit on the couch every day and not do anything, are we okay with that? Without going into resentment, without going into all of that. And at the moment, I think money is a useful tool because it also reflects on each person's self-worth, as we continue to unplug from the self-diminishment programs that exist in the collective unconscious of humanity. So it's a useful tool because it's giving us that reflection of how aligned am I to universal principles. And I think at the moment it is useful to support in our solution at this time.
What other challenges have you seen these communities face? I don't know if they're all, I was gonna say conscious communities. We haven't talked about how many of these have like a spiritual base, but intentional communities or conscious communities, what kind of other challenges have you seen them face trying to pave a new way, and how do they overcome them?
Yeah, well, there's a few. There's definitely the economic one. So communities finding a way of how are we financially at least sustain and not financially thriving. And again, that my kind of tuning into that problem, a lot of people, when they're wanting to go into community, want to kind of get away from the world. So there's a bit of an escape. I don't want to deal with that. I want to create this utopian, amazing space, and I just want to play guitar all the time and, sit around the fire and talk about things. I don't really want to do anything else. So there are people that are drawn to communities because they don't want to fully step in power and activate their gifts and contribute and engage with that's going to create all sorts of problems, for sure. And financially, again, a lot of people that have been drawn to communities have struggled with money, have struggled with finances, have not been able to find a way personally of how to thrive in the world with money. And again, I think have kind of thought, maybe if I go to a community, I get to kind of deal with that, which isn't really necessarily true unless you live a really off-grid kind of way, live off the land and stuff. So I would say the financial issue is there. And I guess the way moving forward is, how can the community look at their gifts and talents and interface with the outside world as a beacon of difference, as a beacon of solution? So for example, creating healing retreats, inviting people from big cities like Los Angeles, Tokyo, be stressed out, and take them through like a wellness retreat, to de-stress them about how they can clean their mind and their emotions and eat healthy food and offer a different type of holiday. We're exposing people maybe to an alternative way of living that could plant seeds in their consciousness, as one example, but also training and development, depending on what that community has mastered. They could create training programs, and that's definitely worth money. Or also acting mentors or coaches for new communities that want to birth. So instead of through all the problems that we went through, we can fast track you, and of course, you pay us some money for that. So I think the communities that have actually got some clear business strategies, to interface with the outside world, are definitely thriving more than the ones that are trying to, I think, escape and isolate. I think they're missing the point a little bit. So that's one challenge. The other challenge, the biggest challenge of all, is humans, like people living together. Every person has different points of view. Everyone has different needs. Needs change over time. We live in a mainstream world that is very individualistic, very narcissistic. People inherently think about themselves. So to shift that mindset to, okay, yes, I honor my needs. I'm aware of my needs. At the same time, how can I contribute to the collective? How can I give to the collective? And find a spot where I feel that there's a beautiful harmonic balance in that. Contributing, and I'm really enjoying seeing how other people in the community are benefiting from my efforts and gifts and talents. And I also, I'm thriving and being supported in that. So there's that beautiful cross flow. So I think when there's, again, different ideologies, different ways of doing things, people have different expectations. You should be working in this way, but you're doing it that way, and I don't like it that way. So all of this stuff is going to create conflict, and different people are just more efficient, more effective in some areas. And again, I think it's easy for all of us to project onto other people what I think is easy for me, and what works and what I think is easy to do, and assume that everyone else out there can does it the same way that I do it. Again, that's just not true, and it's just not going to work. So having a way where the community can integrate chat is really important, like essential. Like Tamira, they had a very clear way of doing that. Interestingly, with Damon, her strategy is if you have a conflict with someone, they put you in the same house with that person until you solve it. So you stay with that person. If you don't like that person, you stay there until you find a way through it.
Nice.
They do it that way, right? So if you've got a problem, then you're going to be waking up, you're going to be living with that person for,
that's great.
Well, forever until you guys sort it out. So that's how they deal with it. Yeah, so the interpersonal challenge is sensitive. And again, making sure, I think when they're inviting people into the community, being really clear on why is this person wanting to join our community? Are they in resonance with the vision that we've got? And is it going to be a win-win? Some communities like Tamira and Dam and Her, they usually have probation. Like you live with us for 6 months or for a year, see how it goes, you know, but you need to kind of live with the person for a long enough time so that their shadows can actually come out and you can see where is that person really at in their evolution and how do they deal with challenge? How do they deal with obstacles? Do they have the maturity, the vulnerability, the awareness, and also the humility to be able to bring that into the space? So
I feel like so much of what you're talking about is like on the micro we learn in relationships and marriages. Like
yeah, definitely.
About why people run or why things don't work. Like it's just, but of course, right? Because on the macro now we're talking about living with many more people and having a relationship with many more people.
So you can imagine, like with one person here, there's certain issues that come up. Now you've got 20 people, 40 people. Right. So all these different reflections coming back. So community living can be very, very intense, really. And I think that also needs to be clearly known. Like if someone, the mindset that I've got of it now, and I actually see this with intimate relationship as well, is to see intimate relationships and community, a whole chemical container where there is going to be challenge, there's going to be a bit of grinding, and it's actually about how can I work with my partner and or my community so that I can evolve and they can evolve, and we're going to support each other in that evolution. And I think for me, that's a healthy way of being realistic as well, rounded in or not utilizing, I suppose, the effectiveness of what communities can actually offer me and what I can offer them.
Yes.
Yeah, it feels like that's where the intention of the community is really supportive, because if we're all here trying for the same thing, we're all on the same page as that goes, it creates a kind of commonality, a common language that can kind of open doors through those particular challenges and interpersonal trials as they would inevitably come up.
Yes.
Talk a bit about we're sort of organizing our questions here. I want to ask about the spiritual thing, and then I definitely want to talk about the kids and education. But highlight for us, if you will, like any kind of communities that are organized around a spiritual kind of consciousness-focused intention or an awakening intention, and maybe just talk a bit about those examples and maybe how they're different than others, and what those intentions are and what it feels like to kind of be in the midst of that field, if you will.
Yeah, great. So there's kind of different groups, because there's some spiritual communities that have very loose, overarching kind of principles, but they don't all follow one way, right? So they basically say, this is how we're going to play life. And as long as your spiritual endeavors kind of fit within this kind of flow, and they're usually pretty broad, you know, they're not just like simple things like don't harm yourself, don't harm other people, you know, take time for your practice, but they're not very specific. So there's that group there. the cool thing, so the advantage to that, the one thing I like about that is that whatever is my truth as an individual is welcome in that space, right? The downside though to that is, in terms of group energy, you can lose that impetus, power of when you bring a group together and you're focusing on a similar direction, whether you're focusing on ceremonies or rituals that everyone's participating in. There's a lot of power that can be generated from that, and that's what Damanhur does, for example. There is a very clear spiritual, metaphysical architecture, and if you want to join that community, you go in through, you start as an initiate, and you follow a path. And at some point, once you've kind of got to the end of the path, actually become the trailblazer to continue creating that path. So that's how they've done it. And they've got different pathways that you follow within that spiritual hub, but they've got ceremonies and rituals where everyone participates in. And there is a lot of power there, and an energy that is built within those communities. Whereas there's also a lot of communities that are just very eco-focused. It's just about permaculture and being off grid, and there isn't necessarily a clear spiritual architecture. And for me personally, what sort of feels true is having a clear resonance of some kind of spiritual meeting point, I feel is important. That would be my personal preference, because again, it's like, if we look at, well, what is actually creating reality, then connecting in linear, the energetic, spiritual realms is essential, because the material is just really the final part of that. And so using the group energy to help manifest that vision, that we're all here to bring, through a spiritual practice will amplify that. And of course, the spiritual practice also supports each person to disconnect from the material plane, to come back within, to come back to themselves, to clean their energy. And again, that also conflict, it minimizes things kind of working, because lower vibrational energies tend to not flow as well. So there's also, from a hygiene point of view, there are enormous benefits that everyone does have some kind of practice that is aligned in one way. So, yeah.
You mentioned one fascinating example in Japan of how education is being done in a different way, or how children are viewed in a different way. Maybe it was beyond education. You talked both about education and family there. I'm curious if you saw any other ways that people are interacting with children in a very different way, and just thinking of education in a very different way.
Yeah, the communities definitely empower their children much more. And I think one of the benefits, like what I noticed that the children just seemed, they were thriving, they were happy, they were excited. They weren't playing computer games. They weren't on the internet, or they didn't want to be on the internet because their life was great. And one of the that seemed to really work is that children were exposed to lots of different adults that had different points of view, different men, different women. They were often raised by different people, so they got a different flavor of how life can be lived. They learned different things because adults have different interests and different viewpoints as well. And that just seemed to create a more rounded kid. That's what I saw. For example, in Tamira, they like youth camps. It was great to see kids that are like 10, 11, standing up in front of people, delivering a speech and feeling like they had as much to contribute as any of the adults there. That was really cool. I really respected that. And the communities were often exploring and often gave the children the option of going, do you want to learn your education in the community, or do you want to go outside? And so sometimes children would often choose both, to get a sense of, well, like out in the outside, what's it like to be educated in the community. It seemed to me that the children that were educated in the community, if there was a group of adults that did to the education of the children, seemed to thrive more. because the education was based on empowerment and based on, you know, what brings you alive and what's exciting for you. And the education method wasn't as limiting and restrictive and that sort of rational left brain sitting at it. Was more movement, you know, like how can we make education more playful and more engaging? And that seemed to be much more available in the communities than, say, in the outside world.
That's great.
I know we've touched on so many different things, but I wanted to ask kind of explicitly before we have to round up, like, so things are changing, right? in our
changing
mainstream society. What do you see? I mean, it can be examples you've given us or just things we haven't touched on. Like, what do you see that the communities that you've learned from and you've experienced have to offer to us in terms of how our mainstream society is going to change, and what can we learn and adopt, and what can we learn both from things that have been challenging and things that have been done well about where we can take our world from here, as we see the structures falling down that we inevitably feel they will.
Yes, I think the key is that we're moving into decentralized, local-based economy again. And so instead of this world being this very impersonal global world where no one really knows each other, it's now you are going to know your community deeply and intimately, know your community. And what these communities have taught us is that when we have an emotional connection to someone or to something, we're not going to harm them or harm ourselves. And it's this impersonal over mentalization of reality where there's this disconnection to feeling and connection, and a sense of placement as well. Where do I belong in this whole reality? A lot of the problems I think will actually solve, like a lot of the mental illnesses, a lot of the diseases that we're present are all symptoms of an unhealthy society. And I mean, in my traveling around the world, humans have the same dreams, highs, the same fears, same limitations. So we're actually very similar in many ways. How we express ourselves is also very different in many ways as well. But communities, I feel, what they are guiding us to step into is to again find your tribe. And I guess there is also a movement around the world, whether it's in the spiritual spaces of, you know, what's your tribe? Who is your tribe? And there is that happening on there, of finding your tribe. But also at a practical level, it's like, you know, who would you love to live with? You know, to co-create with, to create business with, to create projects with. Like, at the end of the day, it's like, who do you enjoy being with? And what type will bring the best out of you, and which groups of people you bring out the best in them. So it's this amplification, this win-win, moving away from this individualistic way of living where each family or each individual adult has to think about everything, from children to earning, to being able to have fun, to traveling and learning. Like, it's almost become, it's unsustainable. It's just not sustainable. And so when we come back into community, what that is going to enable, if someone's having an off day or a bad day, it's not the end of the world. There are resources, there are other people that can pick up the ball, you know, whereas at the moment, there's so much pressure on people to be constantly performing, constantly succeeding, taking that next step. And the mid-term consequences in health, physical health, but also mental health as well. And people tend to die young, you know, and they're not gonna, it's not sustainable how we are living in this over consumeristic reality that isn't actually generating happiness and joy for people. It's not really happening. And so communities, again, will allow people to come back, to live in a different way, more holistic, more grounded, where the pace can slow down and people can get in touch with their actual heart, their connection, and relationships really is such an important part of life. And yes, getting things done, like tasks and creating is important, but not to the detriment of relationships, and also not to the detriment of the earth or other people all plants, animals, and the crystal kingdom as well. So again, it's about finding that harmonic connection, coming back into a way of living is in respect and honor of all living creatures. And we can just enjoy what it is that I'm here to bring to the world and not feel like I've got to manage everything, which is so overwhelming and so intense.
Yeah.
Fabulous. So yeah, this is sort of the question that's been on my mind, I think, the whole time, but kind of like Nicolas, like what is your intention now? And are you thinking of creating something like this? And based on, hypothetically, if you were, based on your experiences and travels and what you've learned, what would be a kind of a framework that you would suggest as a way to begin such a community?
Yeah, so my next step is, thanks to COVID-19, it's great that it's slight change in direction, is I'm going to be heading back to Australia. I finally feel the pull. So I have been traveling this whole time, back to Australia, hopefully August, early September. But again, I'll have to do that. And my intention is, yes, to initially to attract in, say, 5 people. And I won't rush, like I will allow that resonance to attract the right people. Like in a sense, I call it like my soul cluster, where I'd really want to take my time to make sure that this group of people is actually, like, on an energetic, spiritual, as well as on a physical level, a good fit. We amp each other's gifts and abilities, and the shadow aspects are able to be handled in a way that it's not disruptive and going to create conflict, but it's going to actually create growth and evolution. So the first step would be to create the core team and to live with these people for a period of time, to see, well, what's it like to live with these people? Do I love living with these people? Can I love the worst parts of them as much as the most amazing parts of them? Like a family, like really creating that kind of stronghold. Then from there, as we kind of mentioned beforehand, for any community to thrive, has to be a way that group of people can thrive, financially thrive. So then it would be looking at what projects, what things create together where we can thrive together. So we're financially sustainable, and for me at this point, I would say it would be important to be able to interface with the mainstream world. So to have a way of being able to generate money, healthy relationship with money. I don't think we're ready yet to get rid of money yet. I would say in the next couple of 100 years, probably, but that's a couple of 100 years. That's probably we're not going to be alive then. So at the moment, there is learning how to work with money in a healthy way, but not make money the focus. So the focus is still about service. It's still about what's exciting for me to create, what do I love creating, and just allow the money to flow in as a natural byproduct of that. And use the power of the group to create a powerful vortex where the projects and what it is that you're co-creating together has the juice and the energy to attract the right people in and to allow it flow to work. And then the next step for me would be, once you've lived together for a period of time, you've created some kind of sustainable way to then look at buying a piece of land. However, one of the big lessons that actually Tamira taught me was, if you do plan to create a big community, hundreds of people, make sure that it's planning done up front, so that the council or wherever you are allow it, because they're in the situation where they're now blocked. The growth of that community is blocked because the council is limiting fixed buildings that they can have on that piece of land. So there are some things that you do need to think about, like if this community is going to be a place where there's going to be hundreds of people, then you do need to make sure that if you buy the land, that you've got the permit, the agreement to be able to do that in 20, 30 years time, but it's done up front, because otherwise you're going to be. So that's where I'm at with that. And of course, the spiritual alignment work and the shadow integration is obviously, a must. And of course, also having fun and enjoying, creating fun together and play excitement is I think essential as well, not taking it too seriously, and having that intention of how can this creation be a lighthouse operation for others, and also just being, I think, really radically honest about the challenges with these. What really did we struggle at, but what did we learn from those struggles? And I think that can be incredibly useful and powerful for people that may consider transitioning out of living in a city, in the city mainstream matrix world, and are looking for something else.
So wonderful. Feels really honest and accessible and exciting to me. I mean, we're very interested in becoming part of a community or starting one ourselves. So there's so much wisdom that you've shared with us, especially that last part feels so in tune.
Yeah, very mature.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is tremendous. And because you know a lot more about this whole world than we do, I guess our final question is, before we kind of let you sort of share with us maybe ways that others can interact with you, which we certainly want to allow for that, but what question should we ask that we haven't asked?
Yeah,
Is
what
there
did we
anything that
miss?
we've missed here?
So the question that I would have to be able to give you that question is, what is it? Yeah, what is it that you would love to know? Or are you asking me what can I ask that would support me to align to a new earth paradigm, community, or reality that would set my heart on fire? Would that be a useful, overarching, let's say, vision to hold in order to allow that question to come through on the check-in? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So
I think that definitely for me.
Okay. So let me just see. So,
Mm-hmm.
what question that you asked that would really support that? Okay, so the question that came in is, how can I, to the best of my ability, remain in a heart resonance, which is what creates trust, because it's through the heart that every single one of us is one. That's the connection of oneness through the heart. So therefore, any decision or choice that I'm making will naturally take into account everyone else. So any choice isn't going to be a win-lose, it'll be a win-win. And it also allows them to trust that what is unfolding in my community is for the highest and best and is supportive in me. So that feels really, really important, to not get stuck into the mind, which can create separation and limitation and different points of view and potential conflict. So again, it's like, how can I remain in a heart connection with my group, with my community, so that I can be the trusting space to know that what choices I'm making and that what choices others are making, that we can trust each other, that we're moving harmony together, and that we're just amplifying the energy, and the vision is going to come to us or manifest through us with more grace and ease.
Beautiful, Nicolas, beautiful. So let us know, we will let you go. It has been an hour and a half. How people can connect with you after this interview.
Yeah, sure. So my personal website is www.lionheartcoaching.com.au. And that's got a whole series of podcasts that people would like to get a whole lot of different, I've got about 40 different episodes on that podcast called Breaking Free from the 9-to-5 Comfort Zone, under the resource section of the website. There's also a Soul Blueprint Destiny gift on the homepage that people can connect with as well. On social media, again, on Facebook, Lionheart Coaching is a way, and also on Instagram, Lionheart Coach on Instagram to connect with me. And yeah, like basically there's two different interests. One is people that are interested in the New Earth paradigm, which, to be honest, I still feel I'm an apprentice. I'm still learning. It's only been 3 years, so it's still relatively new. But I'm definitely moving forward in that. And then the other interest is more, how do I catalyze my soul truth, my soul blueprint, so that I can live a life that is in flow, that is in alignment with what it is that I'm here to do, aligned to my destiny in a sense. So those are the two different kind of areas of passion and interest that I'm connected with. And I'm happy to answer any questions or support people in any kind of resources or anything. Like if anyone's interested in these areas, then I'm certainly to support people in if they contact me through the website or through social media.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Nicholas. A lot of really grateful messages coming through on the chat stream in the Ownstream community. People are very, very grateful to you for your time and for your wisdom and for sharing all these insights and experiences. It's been really, really wonderful. Yeah, I think we...
yeah, we're inspired too. Thank you so much, Nicholas. Excited to see your next step.
Yes, thank you for holding these beautiful sharings, co-created commons, and to share wisdom and knowledge with people, so people realize there are different ways. There are other opportunities. I don't have to be stuck in the reality that I'm in, and also the projects that you guys are doing, the Great Awakening project, that just sounds incredible and amazing. I hope that it's evolving in its beautiful organic way, and any of the other you're working on as well. So thank you for being New Earth ambassadors as well, and yeah, doing everything that you guys can to support others to feel inspiration and the love in their hearts as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you so
Lots
much.
of gratitude.